Hello and welcome to my second Photoshop sword creation tutorial. Today we're going to make an odachi, which is like a katana except longer. If you haven't seen my first tutorial, I recommend you do so before watching this. Some references to the last tutorial will be made, and this one is a bit more involved. Now let's begin. Hit Ctrl+N, set the width at 50 inches, the height at 1, and the resolution at 200 pixels per inch, which will go without saying from now on since they're all 200 pixels per inch. Set background contents as black, or use the paint bucket tool to color the background black when it's open. Hit Ctrl+N again, width 15 inches, height 1.375 inches, and make the background black. Now for the main document. Ctrl+N, 68 by 10 inches, but this time leave the background white. Use the Move tool to drag and drop the blade base and the handle base into the main document and save as Sword 2 PSD. Now select the blade base, or 50 by 1 inch layer, and go to Filter Distort Wave. Set the type as triangle, both the wavelength minimum and maximum at 25 and the amplitude minimum and maximum at 3, and leave the rest at its default settings. Hit OK, and now the blade base layer has a triangular serration. But it still needs a point, so hit Ctrl+N, 3 by 1 inch, and fill with black on a separate layer. Use the elliptical marquee tool and drag so that the selection curves up from the lower left to the upper right corner, and delete. Move tool, drag and drop, and align with the far right of the blade base layer. Then hold Ctrl and select the layer thumbnail, and move down to the blade base layer and delete. Now it curves up to a point, but you'll still have to select and delete the free-floating serration. It is easier to leave the curve without serration, but to give it one, just select and copy one of the serration triangles. Paste and rotate at 1 degree increments, adding half degrees as the upward curve gets sharper, and align manually. Now that that's been done, it's time to give the blade its hamon. That's the wavy line where the cutting edge meets the broad side of the blade. Ctrl+N, 50.5 by 1.5 inches, color it gray so you can tell the layers apart. Drag and drop and align with the left side of the blade base so the far edge sticks out a ½ inch beyond the blade layer. In the Layers palette, select Drag and Release over the Create New Layer button to the left of the trash can button to make a copy of that layer. Hide the copy for now, we'll use it shortly. Filter Distort Wave again, but this time set the type as Sine, the wavelength minimum and maximum at 200, and the amplitude minimum and maximum at 8. Hit OK, and now you should know what the hamon is if you didn't understand my explanation. Move it up a bit, but select the last downward wave on the right and delete it. If you delete the selection from the blade base without first doing that, it'll take the tip and part of the serration with it. You can use an elliptical marquee to cut an upward curve from the peak of the last wave to the tip of the blade. Now unhide the copy of that layer, which is as it was before we used the wave distortion. Or if you didn't copy it or accidentally deleted it, just do Ctrl+N, 50.5 by 1.5, color it gray, and drag and drop. Align left again, but make sure that the bottom is also aligned with the tips of the serration triangles. Now we'll use the pen tool to align it with the curve at the front of the blade. Yes, I know that Photoshop's pen tool sucks compared to the one in Illustrator, but in this case it's faster and more accurate than using an elliptical marquee. Drag so the curve lines up with the tips of the triangles again, convert to a rasterized image, Control Select and Delete from the second blade base layer, which is the gray rectangle in case you forgot. Now the hamon, as it is now, is a pretty standard curve, but this is a custom longsword, so let's make it a little different. Make a copy of the hamon, then go to Edit Transform Skew, set the H at 60 degrees and apply. This will make the curve sharper. Now remove the original curve and merge this one down in its place, but make sure you line it up properly. If you want an even more unique hamon, you can create another wave distortion and play around with the wavelength minimum and maximum, but don't take the amplitude up too high or it won't work for this tutorial. Now we're going to trim down the top of the blade a bit. Ctrl+N, 40.5 by 0.25 inches, color black, drag and drop. Align centered to the blade lengthwise and along the top edge. Create an elliptical marquee on a separate layer, unless you prefer the Photoshop pen tool, that curves from the bottom right corner of the black rectangle up to the tip of the blade and fill with black. Assuming you use a marquee, you can just make a copy and move to the other side, but if you use the pen tool, you'll have to rasterize it, make a copy, and flip it horizontally to align it properly. Merge both with the rectangle, Control Select and delete from the second blade base layer. Now it curves up slightly at both ends. There's little space left on the broadside, and some of you may be thinking, hey, what are you doing? That barely leaves room for a blood groove. Well, to you I say relax, this is a custom sword design. There's not room for a standard blood groove, but if we make it curve along the edge of the hamon, there's more than enough room, and on top of that it looks better. So let's do just that. Control Select the blade base layer, move the selection up and left, fill with white on a separate layer, then Control Select the blade base layer again and delete from the layer above. I'm not going into detail on how to do the blood groove since I'm pressed for time, but basically you want to do it like the highlights of the handle in the first tutorial, except brighter near the bottom and darker near the top, because it's concave. Just make sure it looks something like that, and it'll be good enough. Make it darker towards the peaks of the waves and lighter at the bottom, and that'll also help. Now it's time for our first gradient. We could use the one from last time, but we'd have to adjust the brightness and contrast again, and there's disadvantages to doing it that way. So we'll make a new gradient, and this time I'm going to give you the specs for the gradient so that you can precisely duplicate it in Photoshop. The gradient is all shades of gray, so on the RGB scale, each value is the same. From left to right, the colors are as follows: 85, 173, 229, 173, 190, and 114. The locations of these colors also from left to right are 0%, 15%, 50%, 92%, 96%, and 100%. The shift or transition from one color to the next is 50% for all but the first two, which is 41%, and the last two, 68%. Give the gradient a name, Blade 2 gradient for example, and hit the New button to save it in the list. Then just drag and drop across so it looks like that. I also used a gradient for the serration, so I'll give you the specs for that as well. The colors are 45, 128, and 107. The locations are 0%, 50%, and 100%. The shift between the first and middle colors is 33%, and between the middle and last it's 67%. You'll need to make a separate layer for it though, because the rest of the second blade base layer still needs its